Opposing Gloves here, and today we are going to be talking about a book review. Oliver Sacks' Musicophilia. Yes, it says Tales of Music in the Brain. And the whole reason I've actually attempted to read this book before when I was like 12 or something, and I couldn't do it. And now that I'm older, I definitely understand why. This book's pretty intense. And right off the bat, I give it a 10 out of 10. Just so you know, I'm going to explain myself in a little bit here. But motives for reading it, I wanted to know more about how the brain worked with hearing. I wanted to know how music was perceived. And so I got this one and a book by Daniel R. Levitian. I'm pretty sure that's how you say his name. And that one's called Your Brain on Music, which is also amazing. But I'm not done with that one, and I have to focus on a couple other books right now. So I've sort of put that one on the side, but I had to finish this one because I rented it from a library. And so it's amazing. Your library probably has this. I've seen it in every public library I've gone to so far. It's kind of an interesting thing that continually shows up, but it's a bunch of interesting subjects. There is one spot just before part 2 that tends to get a little less than exciting. He's talking about people who have seizures triggered by music. And at first it's really interesting, but then he has a couple case studies where that's where I died the first time I read it too. Not like died, but like I just was when my younger self could just found it less interesting. But after you get past it, he jumps into perfect pitch, and the rest of the book just really flows. He starts off with some pretty crazy things too, like a guy who gets struck by lightning and gains a sudden obsession with learning to play the piano. It got so intense that he actually divorced his wife over the whole thing. It was because she couldn't handle how much he played the piano. Like, it was crazy. Other people, they have here's just a range of topics. If you're into this type of thing, this is a phenomenal book. The Daniel R. Levitian, Your Brain on Music's awesome too, and one day I will cover that one as well. That's also a Kindle book, so I can read it, whenever I have my phone. So here he talks about a number of things just off the top of my head. You learn that the frontal lobes, the temporal lobe, are really responsible for musical perception and musicality in a lot of ways. But he also makes it really clear that things are very spread out. He talks about rhythm deafness, people who can't perceive rhythm, tone deafness. He talks about perfect pitch, the perception of perfect pitch. Talks about people who have epileptic seizures triggered by music, and in some cases just sound in general. He spends a good chunk of time on memory. I'm noticing this in a number of books that I have read, but in these two in particular that I've already mentioned, they both they spend a long time talking about how memory works and how it plays a role in music. And it's really kind of intense. Like, there's a whole bunch of different theories, and they side towards the ones obviously that they feel are correct, but they present them all at least all the ones that gain a lot of steam. Now, I've only read 2 books though, so maybe they're leaving things out. I don't know, but I found it extraordinarily interesting and to be able to break down memory and what that is and how it works. Personally, I've become a lot more patient with people in general when they have things that they just behave in ways that maybe before bothered me, or not bothered me, but I just recognized as different. But now I'm like more aware of it and more able to appropriately respond to those situations. It talks about anyone can pretty much develop perfect pitch. Well, a good chunk of people can. So it's definitely something that can be learned. Children who are given intense musical training at young ages can oftentimes keep perfect pitch, depending on the extensivity of their training, if that's a word. Another thing he talks about people who see colors when they hear music, people who taste music, all these weird things. They talks about people who have perfect pitch but are tone deaf, so they can tell you what note you're singing, but they cannot sing the note themselves. He's even got some things in here about singers who with people with perfect pitch, who, if you plug their ears and fill it full of white noise and then tell them to sing based on muscle memory, how they can't do it. They're just as bad as everyone else. And so there's all these other sort of weird things. Talk about people with dementia, really severe dementia. There's a guy named Clive who couldn't remember anything. He's been reliving the same couple seconds or minutes for the past 20 years. But you can sit Clive down in front of a choir, and all of a sudden Clive is there and he can conduct the choir. And as soon as the choir he's done conducting conducting a choir or playing the piano, he's done. There are people who can literally remember who they are and can learn information only while they're playing instruments. There's a guy who developed a problem, and he to overcome his dementia or his memory issues, because apparently there's different branches of dementia. I knew that there were, but there's like one specifically related to music. And that's at the very end of the book. And there's a guy who would just whistle so that he could remember who he was. Like, that's like pretty intense. There's people who can't enjoy music, like some part of their brain that registers timbre. It's impossible. They don't enjoy orchestras. They go to orchestras and it just sounds like utter nonsense and noise. They have no way of making sense of what they're hearing. And he has these people in the book actually talk about it. He has their own experiences written down. It is really, really interesting. He talks about savants, of course, spends a good chunk of time on savants. The perfect pitch thing was the coolest because it gave me a lot of hope that you can learn it. Talks about how tunes get stuck in your head, why they get stuck in your head, and circumstances that are unusual when they get stuck in your head. People who have diseases that cause that, like people who hear music endlessly, like they literally have music bombarding their brain all the time. And in some cases it's a great thing. In other cases, people, it's a normal thing. They're just used to it. Other times people, they can't register emotion with it. And as a result, it's just like endless nonsense. There are people who have had concussions, musicians who've had concussions, and then they do not enjoy music, sometimes for very long periods of time. Like they get hit on their head. And I believe this is also related to it's normally damaged under the temporal lobe, some part where apparently emotion seems to take a focal point, like where you process emotional ties to incoming data from music. And so you say, musician, let's just say you're a professional piano player, you get a concussion, suddenly you are indifferent to music. It's pretty crazy. And you can say that people talk in the book and they're like, I know that this piece of music, I used to like it. It used to make me happy. Now it's just like, whatever. Like, I don't care. It's not that I hate it. I just don't care for it. And then over time, it comes back. They do express, though, that understanding that they once liked it, it scares them that they might not be able to like it again. Usually they have an increased interest in visual arts or some other, they fill up the void with something else. It's really kind of an interesting deal how these things can happen. He talks about people with Williams syndrome and their ties to music. It really made me want to go to a hospital specifically for people with Williams syndrome, because it sounded really cool. There was a professional opera player who apparently lived most of her life with very tough. She could sing all these operas in multiple languages, but she couldn't do really simple cognitive tasks like tie her shoes or do a simple math equation. So it's pretty wild. He talks about this stuff. A really great place to learn how your brain works. And I believe that books like this are also really great for just raising your general awareness of people around you and the way that they perhaps see things. They really puts you in a way to see the world in a different sort of view, which is super useful just as a person getting along with other people. If you have any questions about it, I've granted probably more recent. If you ask me now, I'll give you better answers than if you ask me like probably 5 years from now. Then I'll probably say, dude, man, bro, that's been like 5 years. Then I'll have like more general takeaways rather than the really specific things, unless I pursue this as a study. But anyways, point being, you can ask questions and I'll try my best to answer them however I can. However, I do recommend you get this book and read it. Phenomenal book. I do not regret reading it at all. Subscribe. I have a Patreon if you're interested. I didn't really teach you anything in this video, but if you want to go check out that's kind of cool. I always support that. And have a blessed day. The fundamental tends to last the longest. So this is what I got. So it's a pretty simple bell sound. Now, of course, you can do this with a sine wave exceptionally easy and add a few harmonics. So let's talk about how to make this real fast. So, okay. That's what we start off with. And it's a little intimidating to think now I got to get to that bell texture if you've never done it before.